Welcome back to the Speak and Feel English podcast, the place where language becomes natural, expressive, and confident. I am Mia.
And I am Ethan. And today we are diving into a topic that many English learners hear constantly, but do not always fully understand. And that is the difference between be, been, and being. These three forms come from the same verb, yet they function in very different grammatical environments.
Exactly. And this verb is foundational because it is one of the most frequently used verbs in English. It appears in tenses, passive structures, continuous forms, descriptions, identities, and even abstract expressions. If learners master these forms, their fluency improves dramatically.
Let us begin with the base form, be. The word be is the infinitive form of the verb. It is the pure, unconjugated form that appears after modal verbs, in infinitive structures, and in certain formal constructions. For example, we say, I want to be a better communicator, or you should be more patient. In both sentences, be follows another verb and does not change its form.
That is a key observation. Whenever a modal verb, such as can, should, must, may, or will appears, the verb that follows remains in its base form. So we say, she must be careful, not she must is careful. The modal freezes the verb into its base form, which is be.
We also see be in infinitive phrases beginning with to. For instance, to be honest, I did not expect that outcome. Or, my goal is to be more consistent. In these cases, be expresses a state or condition that is desired or discussed, rather than something tied to a specific tense.
And learners often find this interesting because English allows the verb be to describe identity, condition, emotion, or role. If I say, I want to be supportive, I am not talking about an action, but about a quality or state of character. That is why this verb is so powerful.
Now let us connect that to real conversational speech. Imagine someone preparing for a presentation. They might say, I need to be confident, or I hope to be clear and concise. In both cases, the verb expresses a future or desired state, rather than something already completed.
That is a great transition into the idea that be often signals potential or expectation. It is the form we use when discussing what is necessary, possible, or intended. For example, you are going to be successful, or this meeting might be productive. Here, the verb expresses prediction rather than completion.
And before we move to the next forms, it is important to emphasize that be never stands alone as a past action. It does not tell us when something happened. Instead, it depends on the surrounding words to define time, obligation, or possibility.
Exactly. Now, to prepare listeners for the forms that follow, we should briefly mention that English verbs typically have three core shapes: the base form, the past form, and the past participle. For the verb be, those forms are unusual because they change dramatically. The past participle is been, and the present participle is being.
And this irregularity is what makes the verb challenging, but also fascinating. Unlike regular verbs that simply add endings, this verb transforms its entire structure across tenses and aspects.
Let us briefly preview how these forms relate conceptually. The base form be expresses a general or potential state. The participle been connects to completed time or experience. The form being signals an ongoing state or process. Understanding these three conceptual zones helps learners predict which form belongs in a sentence.
That is a helpful framework because grammar is easier when tied to meaning rather than memorization. If someone understands whether they are talking about possibility, completion, or continuation, they can often choose the correct form instinctively.
Exactly. So if a learner hears a sentence like, I have been busy, they can immediately sense that it refers to experience or duration leading to the present. And if they hear, she is being thoughtful, they understand it refers to behavior happening right now.
And that distinction between permanent identity and temporary behavior will become especially important once we analyze being in depth later. It often signals that something is happening temporarily rather than defining who someone permanently is.
Yes, and that nuance is one reason advanced speakers sound more natural. They choose these forms not only for grammatical correctness, but also for subtle meaning. Saying he is polite feels different from he is being polite. One describes personality, while the other describes behavior in the moment. Now, let us move into the second form, been, which often causes confusion because it belongs to the perfect tense system and signals a relationship between past time and the present.
That is right. The word been is the past participle of the verb be, and it appears most frequently with auxiliary verbs such as have, has, or had. Whenever you hear been, you can immediately suspect that the speaker is referring to experience, duration, or a completed state connected to another point in time.
For instance, if I say, I have been tired lately, I am not talking about a single moment of fatigue. I am describing a continuing condition that started earlier and still influences the present. The form been helps create that bridge between past and present.
Exactly, and that bridge is the defining feature of the present perfect tense. Consider another example. She has been a manager for 5 years. This sentence does not simply describe her past role. It emphasizes that the role began earlier and continues now. The word been allows us to express duration without listing exact starting points.
That is a powerful function because it allows speakers to focus on continuity rather than chronology. Instead of saying, she became a manager in 2021 and is still one, the perfect structure compresses that timeline into a single elegant sentence.
We also see been used to describe life experiences. If someone says, I have been to that conference before, the sentence communicates experience rather than ongoing presence. The speaker is not there now, but the event is part of their history.
That distinction is subtle but essential. I have been there suggests past experience, while I am there describes present location. English uses the participle been to separate memory from immediacy.
Another important environment for been is the past perfect tense. When we say, by the time the meeting started, I had been nervous for hours, the speaker describes a condition that existed before another past event. The participle helps us layer time so listeners understand which action came first.
That layering ability makes English narration much clearer. Without it, speakers would have to rely heavily on context or adverbs to explain sequence. With been, the tense itself communicates order.
There is also the structure known as the perfect continuous, which combines been with a present participle. For example, I have been working all morning. Here, been connects the auxiliary have to the ongoing activity expressed by working. It indicates that the action started earlier and continued over a period of time.
That construction is extremely common in professional conversation because it emphasizes effort and persistence. Someone might say, we have been developing this strategy for months, which subtly communicates dedication and sustained focus.
And notice how the meaning shifts if we remove been. If we say we have developed this strategy, the focus moves to completion rather than duration. With been developing, the emphasis rests on the process.
That difference often influences how statements are perceived. Emphasizing process can suggest collaboration, patience, or careful thought, whereas emphasizing completion highlights results. Skilled speakers choose between them intentionally.
Another area where learners hesitate is pronunciation. The word been is often spoken quickly in natural speech, sometimes sounding like bin or ben. Recognizing these variations helps listeners understand conversations more easily.
Yes, and it is worth reminding learners that written clarity matters more than accent variation. Whether pronounced formally or casually, the grammatical function remains the same. The word still signals connection to a perfect structure.
Let us look at one more illustrative example. Suppose a colleague says, I have been concerned about this issue. That sentence communicates more than a simple feeling. It suggests ongoing reflection, possibly discussion, and a sense that the concern did not arise suddenly.
And that nuance helps build credibility because it implies the speaker has invested time in thinking about the matter. Language shapes perception, and the participle been often conveys depth of experience. Whenever listeners hear been, they should think of 3 core ideas: connection to another time, emphasis on experience or duration, and participation in a perfect structure. If those ideas are present, the form is likely correct. Now let us turn our attention to the third form, being. This form often feels the most abstract to learners because it does not simply refer to time, but to an ongoing state, behavior, or process in progress.
That is an excellent way to introduce it. The word being is the present participle of the verb be, and it typically appears in continuous structures or as a gerund. Whenever we see being, we should imagine something unfolding in real time rather than something fixed or completed.
One of the most common places we encounter being is in the present continuous passive voice. For example, if I say, The proposal is being reviewed. The phrase indicates that the review is happening right now. The focus is not on who is reviewing it, but on the fact that the process is currently underway.
And that structure is extremely useful in professional communication because it allows speakers to emphasize process without assigning responsibility. A manager might say, "Your request is being processed," which sounds neutral and procedural rather than personal.
Another important function of being is describing temporary behavior. Consider the sentence, "She is being unusually quiet today." The presence of being signals that the behavior is temporary and perhaps unexpected. Without it, if we say, "She is quiet," the sentence suggests a permanent personality trait.
That distinction is subtle but powerful. English uses being to show that something is happening in the moment rather than defining someone's identity. It separates character from conduct.
Exactly, and that difference often helps speakers sound more precise and considerate. Saying, "You are being impatient," focuses on current behavior and implies it may change, while "you are impatient" sounds like a judgment about personality.
We also encounter being in longer continuous expressions that describe evolving situations. For instance, the company is being reorganized or new policies are being introduced. These sentences emphasize transformation rather than static conditions.
That is why this form appears so frequently in reports, updates, and official statements. It allows speakers to highlight ongoing development without suggesting finality.
Another interesting grammatical role of being is as a gerund, where it functions like a noun. For instance, in the sentence, "Being honest builds trust," the word being introduces a concept rather than a tense. It refers to the state of acting honestly, almost as if it were an object or principle.
That use often appears in reflective or philosophical speech because it turns actions into ideas. Someone might say, "Being prepared reduces stress," or "Being adaptable improves performance." In these cases, being represents a quality rather than an action tied to time.
Let us also examine how being interacts with adverbs. If someone says he is being surprisingly cooperative, the adverb surprisingly modifies the temporary behavior. The structure signals that the cooperation may not be typical.
And that is a good reminder that language is not only about grammar, but also about nuance. The presence of being often communicates attitude, expectation, or contrast. We should also note that being rarely appears after modal verbs. We would not normally say he should be careful. Instead, we say he should be careful. The continuous participle does not fit the modal structure because modals require the base form. That observation ties our discussion back to the earlier forms. Each variation of the verb belongs to its own grammatical environment. The base form follows modals. The past participle belongs to perfect structures, and the present participle appears in continuous or gerund constructions.
Understanding that distribution reduces confusion significantly. Instead of memorizing isolated rules, learners can focus on recognizing which grammatical framework they are using.
Let us illustrate with a comparison. If I say, "I want to be supportive," I am expressing intention. If I say, "I have been supportive," I am describing past behavior connected to the present. If I say, "I am being supportive," I am describing something I am doing right now. The change in form shifts the time perspective entirely.
That is an excellent example because it shows how meaning transforms even though the core idea remains the same. The verb changes not just grammar, but also the listener's perception of time and intention.
Exactly. And this is why mastering these forms elevates a learner's fluency. They begin to control not only correctness, but also nuance and tone. Now that we have explored each form individually, this is the perfect moment to place be, been, and being side by side and examine how speakers actually choose among them in real communication. When learners see them interacting within context, the system becomes far clearer.
I agree, because grammar is rarely about isolated sentences. It is about choices made in response to time, intention, and perspective. Let us imagine a workplace scenario to illustrate this. Suppose someone is discussing a new employee. One colleague might say, "He wants to be reliable." Another might say, "He has been reliable." And a third might say, "He is being reliable today." Each sentence describes the same person, but from a completely different angle.
That example demonstrates how the verb form shapes meaning. The first sentence, using be, expresses intention or aspiration. It tells us what the person hopes to become. The second sentence, using been, reflects experience and evidence accumulated over time. The third, using being, focuses on present behavior and suggests that we are observing it in real time.
This time perspective is the key to mastery. When speakers choose among these forms, they are really choosing how to position the listener in relation to time. Do they want the listener to think about potential, past continuity, or present activity?
Exactly. And this becomes especially important in professional discussions where tone matters. Consider feedback in a performance review. Saying you need to be more organized expresses expectation. Saying you have been organized this quarter acknowledges consistent performance. Saying you are being organized in this project highlights current effort. Each version sends a slightly different message.
That subtlety can influence how feedback is received. The first feels directive, the second appreciative, and the third observational. The grammar shapes emotional tone as much as factual content.
Another context where these forms interact is storytelling. Imagine someone describing their career journey. They might say, I wanted to be independent when I started, then continue, I have been independent for several years, and finally add, I am being more strategic about my choices now. The narrative moves from aspiration to experience to present strategy.
That progression mirrors how people actually think about their lives. Language provides tools for mapping that mental timeline clearly.
We also see this interplay in problem-solving conversations. Suppose a team is evaluating a process. Someone might say, this system should be more efficient, then note, it has been inefficient for months, and conclude, it is being redesigned now. The forms guide listeners through expectation, history, and action.
That is a great illustration because it shows how grammar structures logic. The listener understands not only what the issue is, but also where it stands in time and what stage of response is occurring.
Let us also examine how questions use these forms. If I ask, what should this report be? I am asking about its intended state. If I ask, where has this report been? I am asking about its past location or history. If I ask, why is this report being delayed? I am focusing on a process happening right now. The verb form determines the type of information requested.
That is an important observation. Questions reveal the communicative function of grammar even more clearly than statements because they show what kind of answer the speaker expects.
Another useful comparison involves emotional expression. If someone says, I want to be calm, they express a goal. If they say, I have been calm, they describe sustained emotional control. If they say, I am being calm, they emphasize deliberate behavior in the moment. The same quality is framed through 3 different time lenses.
And this reinforces the idea that these forms are not interchangeable. Substituting one for another does not merely create a grammatical error, it alters the meaning significantly.
Exactly. Many learners initially try to memorize fixed phrases, but true fluency comes from understanding how meaning shifts with structure. Once they recognize that each form corresponds to a different time relationship, the choice becomes intuitive.
Another interesting point is that these forms often appear together in longer sentences. For example, someone might say, I want to be confident because I have been uncertain, but I am being more prepared now. In that single sentence, all 3 forms create a timeline of growth.
That is a wonderful illustration because it shows how English allows speakers to compress past, present, and intention into one flowing statement. The verb system becomes a storytelling device. As we reach the final part of this discussion, it is useful to step back and reflect on how these 3 forms, be, been, and being, function not as isolated grammar points, but as tools for expressing time, intention, and perspective. When learners understand the conceptual roles behind the forms, they stop feeling random and begin to feel logical.
That is the most important takeaway. Grammar becomes manageable when it connects to meaning. Let us briefly revisit the framework we developed. The base form be expresses potential, expectation, or desired state. It often appears after modal verbs or in infinitive structures, and it points toward what could happen or what should exist.
Then we have been, the past participle, which links a past state to another time reference, often the present. It allows speakers to express experience, continuity, and duration. Whenever someone uses been, they are usually building a bridge between earlier time and a later result or perspective.
And finally, being represents an ongoing state or temporary behavior. It places the listener inside the moment, highlighting process rather than completion or possibility. It shows that something is unfolding rather than fixed.
When we see them as three time perspectives, future orientation, past connection, and present continuation, their roles become much clearer. Speakers are not simply selecting forms at random, they are positioning their message within time.
Let us consider a final comparison to make this practical. Imagine someone reflecting on personal growth. They might say, "I want to be more confident," which expresses intention. They might then say, "I have been more confident this year," which acknowledges progress over time. And finally, they might add, "I am being more confident in meetings now," which highlights present action. The forms chart a journey.
That example shows how language supports reflection and communication at the same time. The grammar does not just describe events, it organizes thought. When learners master these distinctions, they gain the ability to express subtle changes in identity, behavior, and experience. Another useful strategy for learners is to listen for surrounding words. If a sentence includes a modal verb, the correct form will almost always be be. If it includes have, has, or had, the participle been is likely required. If it includes is, are, or was, followed by an ongoing process, being often fits naturally. That pattern recognition helps reduce hesitation in conversation. Instead of mentally translating rules, speakers can notice structural signals and respond automatically. Over time, this awareness becomes instinctive. It is also helpful to practice transforming sentences among the three forms. Take a simple statement like, "She is supportive." You can expand it into, "She wants to be supportive," "She has been supportive," and "She is being supportive today." Each variation trains the mind to associate form with meaning. That exercise is powerful because it forces learners to think about time relationships, not just vocabulary. And once they begin noticing these shifts in everyday conversation, their comprehension improves as well. Ultimately, mastering this verb is not about memorizing tables. It is about understanding how English organizes time and perspective. These forms appear constantly in professional speech, casual conversation, storytelling, and even emotional expression. And once they feel natural, learners often notice their confidence increasing because they can express themselves with more precision. Instead of speaking in short, simple sentences, they begin to form ideas that show depth, duration, and intention.
That is when language truly becomes expressive rather than mechanical. The goal is not perfection, but clarity, and these forms provide the structure needed to achieve it.
So as you continue practicing, remember this simple guide. Choose be when discussing possibility or expectation. Choose been when linking past experience to another time. And choose being when describing something unfolding right now. If you keep that framework in mind, your choices will gradually become automatic, and your speech will sound more natural and confident. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of the most important verbs in English. And if you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more lessons, discussions, and podcasts designed to help you speak and feel English with confidence.